Hey, how you doing? This is John, and welcome to John's Long Box. I'm here live with Tom Vasel of the Dice Tower. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing really good.
First off, thank you for coming on. I know you're a super busy guy. For those of you who do not know, Tom Vasel is the owner and founder of the Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is the longest running and biggest board game channel on YouTube. The link is in the description. And my moderator Marcus already threw up the links. Thank you, Marcus. So, Tom, you've been reviewing board games for 20 years now, right?
Yes, I have been actually 21 now.
Wow, time flies. And I'm a big fan of the Dice Tower. You can see I geeked out and I wore my Dice Tower T-shirt. Tom runs conventions and a cruise. It is amazing how big the Dice Tower has become. It is a phenomenon. It's an inspiration for people who do YouTube, if you ask me.
I would say that we're not as big as people think. People always think things are really big. I mean, we have eight employees, which is, bigger than most board game things, but smaller than a vast majority of companies in the world.
Yes, yeah. Well, for a guy who started talking about comic books on his iPhone a couple of years ago, you are an inspiration of how big YouTube could actually get. So I'm a board game fanatic. You can see I got board games, but I'm also a comic book freak. Here's my spinner rack full of comics, and here's my back issues that I got to read. And I know Tom is a comic book fan also. So I thought this would be a fun interview of talking about board games and comics. So, Tom, is it fair to say that up until fairly recently, comic book based board games have been pretty lousy?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's been very few. I mean, it's a little messy now because when we talk about things like Marvel, the fact that the cinematic universe is so strong influences it. So a lot of people don't even realize they're based on comics sometimes.
Right.
But yes, comic-based games haven't really existed until the past 20 years, and particularly the last 10.
And all of a sudden now that they're legitimate, good quality, what we call hobby board games. Like whenever I tell people I'm into board games, you know the question they always say, like Monopoly, and the snooty people always go like, no, not Monopoly, but I always say yes. Let people get a base of comparison. And I remember as a kid, I had this Fantastic Four and Spider-Man game. Are you familiar with that? It was a Hasbro game. It was a roll and write. And it was just roll your dice, move. And now I was just playing Marvel Unmatched the other night with friends, which is a phenomenal board game. So I would say that the board games, IP-based board games have leapt leaps and bounds since I was a kid with that Marvel Spider-Man Fantastic Four game.
Yeah, I think that I don't know that the earliest one I played was the X-Men, whatever that was called, something like in the mansion, something to that effect.
Yeah, the earliest X-Men game I had those cool miniatures. That's why I bought it. But the game was pretty bad. You went up and down the little tracks fighting X-Men villains. And then the first superhero-based board game that actually impressed me was, do you remember Marvel Heroes by Fantasy Flight Games? Where one person was the Fantastic Four, and then another person would be Doctor Doom. And then when it was that person's turn, he would be the X-Men, and then the other player would be, say, Magneto. And and I was like, wow, this is a light years departure from the board game, the superhero board games that I played as a kid.
I was just thinking about that game because it's been a while since it's come out. It's designed by some pretty renowned designers in the board game industry. They made another game called War of the Ring, which is very well received. But this one was well received, but at the end of the day, looking back at it, it was fun-ish, but it didn't allow you to be superhero-y enough.
Right.
It was more of a controlled thing than anything else.
I remember that game. I got it secondhand because it's impossible to find. I got it on eBay, and the rule book was so dense. It was the first time I actually went out and went to Board Game Geek and looked up files to see if other people could explain the rule book to me, to the point where I had friends come over and we sat around the table and read the rule book just to try to figure out how to play the game. It was the first time that a rule book has defeated me that I had to ask for help. And it's funny that you said it's the War of the Rings, same designers.
Yeah.
I love that game. I had a friend over a couple of weeks ago, and it was a 6-hour session. I saw your video with the enhanced pieces in the terrain, and I put that out.
Oh yeah, isn't that stuff great?
Oh my God,
it's really nice.
It is the only board game that I play, and I want to photograph and just let people know how beautiful it is. I've set it up just to look at it and to put it down, which is like a 2-hour setup, so it doesn't get on the table too often. Nowadays, it's at the point where superhero board games are all over the place, so I can't even keep up with them.
Marvel definitely has the lead there. Most of the best games are Marvel games. There's a few decent DC games, and then there's a few that are based on other things. There's a good TMNT game, and a few other games. Unfortunately, IDW, which had a lot of comic properties, had their own board game branch, but they've shut that down. So I don't know what will happen in the future with that.
Yeah, IDW's had some troubles. I collect comics every month, and I put in my order, and I noticed that IDW, like some months, doesn't even offer anything for sale. So I wonder for the future of that company, which is a shame because they were a great comic book company with like Premier Comics at one point. You mentioned the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games, Shadows of the Past, I think it's called. That is a phenomenal, fun game, which I really enjoy. You roll the dice, and then you put the dice at the edge, and the other turtles, the other players could borrow the dice and use. Very, very good cooperative game. Unfortunately, I don't get that to the table too much because I like to play that with 5 people. And how often do you get 5 people to sit down?
Every week. You just gotta hunt them.
Yeah, I had a board game group that got destroyed by COVID. Everybody kind of stopped showing up, and you know how easy it is to break a habit. And now I'm lucky. I moved out here to out in Long Island. I got 2 groups on Mondays and Thursdays. Now we play games again, so that's a lot of fun. So I wanted to ask you, I know you're a big Marvel fan. What are some of your favorite storylines?
I think my favorite storyline, I think it's switched. My top 2 storylines have been Age of Apocalypse and Civil War, the first Civil War. I think I used to say Age of Apocalypse, but I think Civil War has passed it. I go back and reread Civil War once in a while, and then go back and read all the surrounding stuff. That's the one thing I like about Civil War is there's a pretty strong central storyline, but there's also there's a good offshoot, what they call it, front lines, right? Civil War front lines. There's a really good offshoot on that.
Frontlines was great. I'm glad you remember that. A lot of people don't know what I'm talking about. It was like a Frontlines. It was like a secondary title based on like newspaper reporters going out and reporting. Am I remembering correctly? Is that what Frontlines was?
Yeah, and actually it follows a few stories. One of them is the newspaper reporter whose name I forget. Just the same guy that they have hunting everything. But it also follows the story of Speedball and what happens to him. Since he's in that group, he's in the young what are they called? Yeah, the New Warriors that caused the initial explosion, which ignites the whole thing that causes Civil War, and it shows what happens to him, where he turns, he just gets very bitter, and how the public blames him in particular. And he was one of the silliest, funniest comic book characters, and they changed it, but they did it in a way that made sense.
Right.
It turned into a really gross character called Penance.
Absolutely.
And then he recovers from that, but I just really like that whole storyline. I like the little offshoots. I think they leaned a little too hard into, if there's one negative about the storyline, it's that if you read that and you side with Iron Man, I find that hard to believe. Like in the movie, you're like, Iron Man, Captain America, they both have good points. In the books, Iron Man does so many shady, over the top, mean things that it's really hard to side with him.
Yes. He becomes like a. Oh God, I'm sorry.
No, I was saying he hires villains. He like beats up. He has his guys go out and capture kids and bring them in, and he's saying good things. And honestly, in real life, if there was a superheroes and there was a superhero registration act, I think I would be on board with that. I think I would demand that because they're very powerful, and you would want to. I think I would live in fear all the time if I lived in the Marvel universe.
Especially the way the X-Men behave. I've been saying ever since I was a kid, it has nothing to do with civil rights or anything. The X-Men behave very badly and then cry that they're treated poorly. I'm like, like,
yeah, it is weird. I mean, they try to compare it, so it's always been a story that means something. Originally meant racism, and they move on to different things that it stands for, but it's not the same thing.
Right.
The fact is, if someone it can explode and kill everybody in the room, I don't necessarily want to be in the same room as that person. I've never understood that whole idea of, oh, mutants, they're just different. And even, I mean, it really came to a head in that terrible movie, the X-Men, the third movie, where Rogue wants to get rid of her superpowers, and Storm's like, our superpowers are a blessing. And it's such a privileged thing for her to say.
Yeah, you got a cool power, Storm. I kiss my boyfriend and kill him. I can't even.
Yeah, and it's just such a weird thing to me that they kind of like, no, it's part of your identity. I'm like, that's kind of like me having a huge wart in my face, and like I would like to cut that off. And people are like, no, that is part of your identity. Anyway, I can look over that, but my second favorite is X-Men: Age of Apocalypse because I've always loved X-Men, but the stakes have never been particularly high. In fact, I'm a little bit behind on my X-Men reading, so I'm not completely caught up. But the whole Krakoa Island thing that the X-Men are now, where whenever they die, they can come back to life, has lowered the stakes so much. I don't even care anymore.
Absolutely.
And the fact that when they die, they bring them back. But in Age of Apocalypse, death was death. And so they did it. They also switched a few characters around from good to bad. And I really liked it. It was such a fantastic, it was very dark. It had a good ending, but it was very dark throughout. I mean, and it introduced two of my favorite characters, Blink and Morph.
Okay.
I guess technically Blink was introduced in the regular universe and then died almost immediately. And Morph was around to some degree, but the way they were, and with Sabretooth, that team was such a good team. It was them three, and I think Rogue and Wild Child. It was a great team, and I really enjoyed that. I like Gambit. It was just a fantastic series overall, and showed what the X-Men would be like if they had a leader who was not bipolar or whatever Professor X is, where he's hot and cold. Magneto was just like, this is how we're going to run the X-Men, and I really liked it.
I always found Professor Xavier to be one of the creepier characters in comics. Like, we're not going to use our powers to influence normal humans, except when we do. I found him to be kind of hypocritical. I like the Age of Apocalypse because it was really the first time they showed a multiversal alternate characters, and it had high stakes, and they were different, and they were creative. But nowadays I find the multiverse to be kind of like a crutch. Oh, Wolverine's dead. Boom, here's another Wolverine. Here, we're just gonna,
Yeah, it really is. And they tried to get rid of all the multiverses, but then they started bringing them right back. I actually, so it's interesting. I wish that Marvel had the guts to follow through with their original plan back in the late 90s, when they were planning to turn Professor X bad. They were going to have him be a bad guy all along, or whatever they were going to do with him. And people found out. Spoilers, it was the very beginning of the internet, and spoilers came around. So they changed it and took Professor X's powers with Magneto's psyche and made a creature called Onslaught.
Yep.
Which was a pretty decent storyline. It was interesting, but it didn't have the big bang ending that it should have had, and it did some really weird things where they split the universes and stuff. But if they had just had the guts to turn Professor X bad, I think I would have really enjoyed that storyline. In fact, I read a fan fiction one time where, not that kind of fan fiction, but someone wrote out what if Professor X had been bad, and it was just fantastic.
So it sounds like you're a fan of when they shake everything up.
I'm a fan of when they shake things up, I suppose, as long as it's not just shaking things up for the purpose of shaking things up. Like Onslaught was interesting at the end because all the heroes left Earth, apparently. They all sacrificed themselves. Yeah, there was no Fantastic Four, no Avengers, and that would have been an interesting storyline. But what they did is they put him in another universe. People hated the new universe, and so they instantly brought him back. Like I think it was a year later. It was really quick.
Yeah, it lasted 11 months. What happened was Marvel was doing really poorly. It was in the red, and they needed to shake it up. And Image Comics, if you remember, was all the rage. So Marvel actually licensed out all of the characters to the Image creators, Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee and all these. And the Image people were making Marvel Comics, and that was supposed to be the way going forward from now on. That was originally supposed to be the new standard, and it was so poorly received that instead of redoing the contract, they brought him back. And I thought it was just sloppily done, and it there was I wasn't a big fan of Image Comics in the 90s.
I was not either. It felt like they had some interesting storylines, but the art in them was like, we're just going to push the boundaries. And it's everything now that we kind of cringe at.
Right.
When you walk in a comic store and you're like, oh, don't look at that comic. And that's a lot of Rob Liefeld. And even when he drew the Marvel comics, like I think this past week, Z found a picture of the Captain America drawn by Rob Liefeld, the side shot where it looks like his body is some idiotic, humongous torso.
That just sold for $300,000. The original art of that just sold for $300,000. and Rob Liefeld's got a good sense of humor about it. I was. This is going to be mean, but I was not a fan of Rob Liefeld, and I was one of those early keyboard warriors on the message boards. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. He can't draw feet. His anatomy is all wrong.
Yeah.
But I got to say, he won me over with nobody has suffered the slings and arrows in the comic book world like Rob Liefeld, and came out with a positive attitude and still loves comics. And he's just like, yeah, well, I got famous really quick, and I didn't. So he won me over. There's something about being positive.
No, I agree. So anyway, you asked me to my favorites, so that would be Civil War and Age of Apocalypse. I like them a lot, and I'm still waiting for something like that. The problem is because of those two series were so successful, it feels like every year we need to amp it up, and I wish they would wait every 5-10 years to do some massive, crossover. I mean, I like crossovers. I like Secret Wars. Who doesn't like Infinity Gauntlet? That's really interesting stuff. I just think it should be more surprising. But I mean, after a while, they start talking about things like the Venom thing. I didn't care about that at all. I didn't care about the Scree and the
Kree Skrull.
What was that? The Kree, the Kree Skrull war with what's his name, Hulkling and whatever. And I was like, what is all this? I don't even care about any of this, because for me, and this is a personal thing, the bigger the stakes get in Marvel when they go Universal, it's hard for me to understand what's going on. When it's to save Earth, it's a little bit more understandable. But when they did the storyline of the Infinite Earths and everything, I was really confused.
Right.
I was reading the comments going, who's attacking who? Who are these people? And when they got rid of all that and they did their alternate, I forget what that series was called, where Doom was in charge of everything.
Emperor Doom.
Yeah, but what was that series called? It wasn't called Emperor Doom, was it?
Oh, when Doom was like god of the world, it was Secret Wars 2, I think. And
yeah, which doesn't make any sense because that was a little bit better because that was more interesting. Although they were like, "Ooh, we're going to do Age of Apocalypse again," but this time we're going to go so wild that it almost felt like they were making it for a video game. Here's the zombie world. Here's a Hulk world. Here's a world where only women are superheroes, and it just felt like they were throwing out ideas. You take a world and do whatever you want with it.
Yes, I agree with what you said 100%. I wanted to touch on that, like the crossovers. Like I think you and I are older school comic book fans, and we remember the original Secret Wars, and that was a phenomenon. That was fun. It was like it's never been done before. It's going to be a mini series. We're going to take all the good guys. We're going to go on a different planet. They're going to fight all the bad guys, and the Beyonder wants to see which is better, good or evil. I thought that was so cool and so fun. The problem is you can't capture lightning in a bottle every 6 months, and then they're pumping out.
We know that the Secret Wars 2 exists.
Yeah, and Secret Wars 2 was that was the first time I bought comics every month for me and my friends to laugh. Like, how bad could this possibly get? I think that was the original hate reading, hate watching, if you know, which people do these days. With, I guess I'm guilty of it.
Well, I actually didn't read Secret Wars when it came out. I went back and reread it years
And it's
later. I
fun.
didn't start reading until the 90s. But the what's interesting about Secret Wars is the long-lasting effects. I mean, if nothing else, Venom is a direct result of Secret
Yep.
Wars, which is interesting. And it just was kind of Spider-Man just found an alien symbiote on the ship while he was moving around. It it moved it moved them up a little bit in prominence, and it showed some good interaction between like Wolverine and Captain America, and also Doom, of course, being Doctor Doom.
Right.
Speaking of that, do you think they're going to make Doctor Doom the new main villain of the
Oh
Marvel
yes,
Cinematic
yes.
Universe?
It's such a shame that they. First off, I thought the actor who played Kang, I thought he was a good actor, and he had like a charismatic menace to him that I did enjoy as a villain. So it's a shame that, you know, I don't want to kick a man while he's down, but looks like that's what he did. So they have to move on, and I think Doom is the best.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because when these things happen, you think in a very selfish manner, like, but I wanted to see this movie without
Absolutely.
thinking about real world consequences. Although I'm saying, honestly, I don't know. Marvel has to really win me back in the cinematic universe. I thought they did a good job. Um, all the way up to Endgame, even beyond Endgame, there was some good movies after that. Now this feels like they lost their way,
Yes.
which is how I feel about the Marvel comics. I really wish that there was somebody who had a strict hand on all the storylines, because I think the storylines sometimes they'll try to tease things, and then it kind of they don't know what to do. Like if for a long time, remember the whole who's the traitor who betrays the X-Men? And it turned out it was in the Onslaught storyline where it was sort of Professor X, but not really Professor X. Now, had it been Professor X, that would have been a great story. And Gambit didn't play a huge role in that story as much as he should have, because him and Bishop were the ones who came back, right?
Yeah.
Where Bishop came back and it was him and Gambit. That didn't feel like it paid off. There was this side comment one time where Mr. Sinister said that Cyclops had a third brother, and they
Yes.
just retconned that one into existence. They didn't have that planned at all. They didn't know what to do. And then they made Vulcan and brought him in later, which was actually, I will say, that's a storyline I really enjoy.
I'm impressed. You know your comic book minutia. I'm I'm really impressed, Tom.
Well, I mean, that storyline was impressive because what they did, if you've never read it, for those watching, they went back and said that before the X-Men, there was another team that all died.
Right.
And then Professor X went out and got the X-Men. And that sounds like a definitely, I mean, it is a retcon. There's no clues in the storyline beforehand. But it worked. It worked really well. And they brought in some really interesting characters, including one that they stuck in a movie and then instantly killed, Darwin.
Yeah, which I thought was a fascinating power.
Yeah, it was really cool. And I couldn't believe they killed him in a movie. It made no sense.
Great superhero name, interesting power that's never been done before, and they did nothing with them. I was really disappointed with that.
Yeah, but in the comics, they did some good things with him. And Vulcan was an interesting character. And I thought that whole series was an interesting series, and I was pretty happy with it. I kind of went into it like, I hate retcons. I really do. I mean, the main reason they never told us Wolverine's backstory for the longest time is because they didn't know it.
Right.
You know?
And I thought he worked great as a mystery, you know? You know, he was the man.
I don't mind those mysteries being solved, though.
Yeah. You said retcon. I agree with you. I don't like when they're retcon stuff. I don't really have a problem if they pull something out of the air, but it doesn't contradict anything. You know, I hate when they were like, oh, everything you knew about Wolverine was wrong. He was really a grocer from Miami for his whole life, you know, and then they invalidate all of these other stories. That drives me berserk. But to fill in the gap, like when they pulled out this lost X-Men team, I was like, all right, it's not like they changed the past or invalidated another writer's story to bolster up this writer. That drives me nuts. But yeah. If they could wedge something in and it fits, that's okay in comic books. Everybody kind of does that.
Another Marvel series I really like, and it's not really a series as it's just a comic book run. I'm a big X-Men fan. I really like Joss Whedon's run on the X-Men. Um, there's a few weird things with it. I don't particularly like the Cyclops White Queen relationship that has never and will never make sense to me.
Right.
But seeing Kitty Pryde come in and be a teacher to new students and actually having a class of mutants as opposed, it was the first time they had done that, as opposed to having like 5 students in our school that looks like a mansion. Now they had, many students. And I thought the storylines were interesting. Danger Room becoming a character, Professor X's, it's a really weird storyline, but his unborn twin, coming back. I don't know. I thought it was a really cool storyline for a while. It kind of meandered off near the end, but I enjoyed it for a bit.
Yeah, that was a good. The Astonishing X-Men, I think, was the name of that comic. Because it's hard to keep track, because how many X-Men titles are there? There's Uncanny, there's X-Men, there's Astonishing, there was the new X-Men, and then they kind of changed their names around. And I got to say, even a crazy comic book person like me found it hard to keep track of all of these X-Men titles. Did you when you said you like Blink and Morph, did you read that comic? And it's driving me nuts that I can't think of the title.
The Exiles.
Yes, Exiles. Did you read Exiles?
Yeah, I really liked Exiles, because Exiles, the way Exiles plays out is kind of a what if. What ifs are some of my favorite comics. I love reading the what if, because they're one shots and they can do whatever. And that's kind of what the Exiles were. They took your characters, because I was not the only person who liked these characters. So they brought them back. They brought back Morph and Blink and Sabretooth and a few other characters. And they just basically had them time jump from planet to planet. And on a planet, they could just do a what if. Like, oh, what if Captain America was a mean boss of the entire planet? Or what if in this planet it was about to explode and they have to get everybody off? Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I found it to be a very enjoyable, fun comic that had some, connection, because these characters are jumping from universe to universe, but also kind of each one is like, ooh, here's our episode of the week. And I thought that was a really fun comic to read. And it lasted for a good
comics.
Yes.
Yeah, I liked it. To me, that was the one of the best uses of multiverse stories, because you kind of knew the premise from getting into the comics. They're going to jump from universe to universe, and the MacGuffin device on their wrist wouldn't let them leave unless they solved the mystery of the month. And then they solved it. Then they were able to try. And after so many times, they were able to be freed and go back to their own universe. It was a hokey comic, and it seems like it shouldn't work, but it was a lot of fun. I did enjoy that. And then they brought it back, and it wasn't good. I wanted to get back to one of your comments earlier. You said you think Marvel kind of lost their way, the Marvel universe and the comics. I'm a big comic book fan from way back. Like, here, I'll show you this. I show everybody this picture, but this is my comic book room. So I'm a lunatic when it comes to comics. I stopped reading Marvel.
Yeah, my comic book room is this is my comic book room.
I know. I have to have physical copies. Like, I don't play board games on Board Game Arena. I like to have people sitting at my table, physical copies of board games, physical copies of comic books. But I don't begrudge if you read them on actually, it's pretty good, because it's a good cheap way to read a lot of these old comics that are.
It really is.
You know what I mean? Try to read Fantastic Four #1 these days. You got to put a mortgage on your house to get a copy. But I stopped cold turkey in 2015, because I just thought Marvel had lost their way. Like, the ins of the company, a lot of people retired. There was a lot of people that left, and there was a lot of new editors. And I just felt like they're going to be like, oh, everything you knew about Marvel and DC is wrong, and we're going to change it up. And it's like, okay, that sounds fun, but you're going to alienate. Do you remember the Crisis on Infinite Earths? Were you around for that?
Yeah, I'm not as steeped in DC lore. I know some Batman, and I know about the different DC things, and I'm slowly reading them. But I don't know a whole lot about it. I know a little bit about what happened in Crisis of Infinite Earths, but that's basically DC's way of saying, hang on, let's fix everything.
Right. And so I remember when that came out, all the old timers, I was a kid, and I remember the guys with the gray beards that looked like me were like, they ruined comic books and I'm done. They destroyed my childhood, and they left. And now in 2015, I want to apologize to all those people because I feel Marvel and DC did that to me. They ruined my childhood, and they disrespected comic books, and I moved on.
I don't know. I mean, there's some good storylines. The thing is, I complained about the new Krakoa storyline. I guess it's been going on for several years now.
Yeah, it's like 6
But
years.
the way they got there was interesting. Giving that the superpower that they gave to Moira, her X-Men power, was really interesting.
Yes.
I like that a lot. I just didn't like the end result of it, and I didn't hate Civil War 2.
No, that was like the last. That was one of the last Marvel comics I still collected. I agree with you.
And yeah, there's things that I'll still read single issues, and Spider-Man, I kind of flit in and out. I mean, as with every fan on Earth, I hate it. One more day or
One More Day?
What was it called? When
yeah.
But you know what? As much as I hated that, and I don't know what I mean, Marvel Comics hates anyone who gets married to Marvel Comics. Something bad's gonna happen. They hate happiness. They hate it.
Yeah.
Jean Grey, Cyclops get married. They hate that. I think have they split up Rogue Gambit yet? They probably have.
I don't know, but they're messing with Reed and Sue, my favorite comic book couple of all time, and I can't take it.
Yeah, right. So anyway, so them splitting up Spider-Man was weird, but I did like Brand New Day. I read it grudgingly, like, fine. But as time went by, I found it to be a very fun comic. And they lowered the stakes a lot, where he was just fighting a few people at a time, and how he was living. And I don't know, I just found it to be a very interesting storyline.
Did you read the Superior Spider-Man?
Yeah, I like that storyline, actually.
Me too. Everybody hated that. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to step over you.
No. I was gonna say, I feel like the Avengers were pretty stupid in that storyline. I feel like they should have figured it out a little faster. They're like, "Oh, you killed that guy. Oh, you shouldn't do that, Spider-Man." Like, I would have been like, "He's different." Occasionally they'd be like, "He seems different," and then they would be like, "Forget it." I'm like, "Come on!" Of all the people to catch this. But other than that, I found it to be very fascinating, interesting storyline. I thought it was, mumbo jumbo stuff the whole way through.
I always call it magic science. It was magic science,
Yeah, but it paid off later on when they started doing the multiverse with Spider-Man, which is, you were talking about the multiverse. I don't mind the multiverse in the Spider-Man universe for some reason. And I thought having a Superior Spider-Man, they actually went to him and got him at a critical point, which I thought was funny.
I remember people were like outraged by it, and I was like, "Come on, guys, haven't you read comic books before? They change the status quo, they give us a story for 6 or 7 months, and then they bring it back. So just enjoy the ride." For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, Dan Slott was writing where Dr. Octopus magic sciencely took over Peter Parker's body, and he was going to prove that he was better at being Spider-Man than Peter Parker was, and he logically, methodically fixed all of his problems. Like Peter Parker never got his PhD. He couldn't run a business, and then he was gonna get a girl and be married. And I thought it was really fun, except he's a psychopath supervillain as masquerading as a hero. It was a fun storyline.
Yeah, actually, though, he wasn't really a psychopathic supervillain. He was like a superhero because he was supposed to be, not because he felt heroic. So he would save people, but if that meant killing a villain, so be it.
Right. Yeah. And he was spying on people. Like he had like little tracers spying on villains all the time, just creepy stuff that you're like, yeah, it kind of makes sense, but a superhero shouldn't do that.
Well, when they switched back eventually, Spider-Man kept some of that stuff. He kept those little spider tracers. I enjoyed that. And yeah, there's some fun storylines in there that I just enjoy. I enjoy this stuff. I haven't read Marvel in a good bit here. I when I get, sometimes I just go back and read old stuff. But Marvel's what I mostly read. I've read some indie stuff. My favorite comic of all time is a comic called Bone.
Bone is wonderful. Isn't that so good?
It really is. If you're watching this, you've never watched it, Bone is a completely finished series, so you can read the whole thing, by Jeff Smith. And it starts off feeling very Mickey Mouse, like there's these 3 Bone characters and they are goofy and doofy, and ends in one of the most grandiose fantasy things you'll ever see in the comics.
That's actually scary.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. I mean, but there's also moments I've laughed out loud reading it.
yeah,
It's
the Great
really
Cow
funny.
Race. You know, they got Ted the Bug. You know, and like you said, it's like Chuck Jones meets Walt Disney, whimsical goofiness. And I tell my friends, stick with it, stick with it. And every one of them that I recommended Bone to, they came back. They're like, that was phenomenal. Towards the end, like with the stick eaters and that big chupacabra monster that I can't remember the name. Do you remember the scene where he was that monster fell and it was in the cave and it was just rocking back and forth and you would just see it in the shadows? That was terrifying.
Yeah.
And then
You know, it
that
reminds me a little bit of, it's like Calvin and Hobbes in the sense that Calvin Hobbes, Bill Watterson would draw the art and then he would draw these amazing dinosaurs and then go back to
yeah,
Calvin Hobbes. That's the way they'd be like, here's Bone. And suddenly there's a dragon that looks like
right.
an actual real dragon. And you're like, whoa, what's going on? And it's the characters are great. The beats are pretty strong. Yeah. And you can get an omnibus
Yeah,
of the entire thing. It's worth it.
yes, you can. It's totally worth it. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's one of my favorite comics, and it's one of my, like, when people say, "Do you know what can I get for kids?" Because I think I'm a big fan of all ages comics, and I think that comic books today are kind of failing kids in that they're making everything a little too suggestive for 10 and 11-year-olds. But Bone, you could give that to a kid and they can enjoy that, and you could give that to an adult and they can enjoy that. Just like Bugs Bunny, we can enjoy Bugs Bunny, or Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, or The Hobbit. You know, I think children's literature is very important. And Bone, I'm so glad you brought that up. You've got to remember the one line that actually gave me chills was when Rose goes, "I never had a sister." Do you remember when they were,
Oh yeah, that's true. I was gonna say cat got your tongue,
that's
but
another good one. But when Rose goes, "I never had a sister," I was like, "Oh, I got the chills." I was like, "This is supposed to be children's literature," and I'm actually scared. You know?
yeah, it is. So I mean, John said it's for kids, and I agree kids can read it, but I would definitely they can get a little spooked by it for sure
Yeah.
as it goes by because there's some pretty scary guys in it. There's nothing
This.
I don't know, maybe 10, 11, 12 could handle it, but I would definitely be there, like, to talk to them about it. But yeah, it's a pretty solid storyline. And they were gonna make I'm still annoyed that Nickelodeon had the rights to make a cartoon on that and it just went into the
Right.
ether.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Jeff,
they ever will with Netflix around. Come on, someone's gotta make a Bone
it
movie.
I'm surprised Disney didn't buy it up and make a movie. You know, the comic was practically a love letter to a, old Disney style animation. You know, I don't know. Who knows? But maybe Jeff wants total control of it and they're not willing to. But it is. It should be a movie. And I think it would be a phenomenal Pixar or two-dimensional Disney film in the old school animation. How good would that be?
Oh, never mind. I was looking. Netflix was going to do it, but then they canceled it.
Yeah.
That was last year too.
Yeah.
Boo.
What a shame. Part of me is like, you know what? It's becoming a meme at this point. They're like, oh, your favorite IP is getting a movie. Oh, yay! Oh, it's 2023. Oh, bad. I think they've been dropping the ball with so many things lately, and I've been going backwards in time and reading older and older comics because Marvel, like you said, the Marvel MC universe is kind of I found that the high point, it's like a pyramid. The high point was Endgame, and now it's on a downward slide, and I don't know if they're going to recover. You know,
But you know what? I don't know that it matters. That's the thing I keep reminding myself. When Endgame was over, when we left the theater, I told my daughters, I was like, if I never see another movie again my whole life, I'm happy because it was that good. And that's kind of, I still can think that. Like, right, Endgame was great. All those movies were great. Just because I don't like the newer ones as
right,
much doesn't mean that those older ones have been hurt by that.
right. I totally agree with you. Like, it's no secret that I'm not a fan of the new Star Wars movies, but the original Star Wars movies are phenomenal movies that I still go back and watch and enjoy. A lot of Marvel and DC, I'm not really crazy about what they're doing, but that doesn't mean that these old comics that I grew up and love, I'm not going to just toss them in the garbage now. I absolutely agree. They'll make a second edition of a board game. That doesn't mean I'm going to throw away the first edition because I don't like the upgraded components or whatever. So yes, I absolutely agree with you 100%. I wanted to talk to you. You said the Krakoa storyline was going on a little too long. And I don't know if you're familiar with Jonathan Hickman. He was the writer of Krakoa. He is a phenomenal writer. He did the Fantastic Four. He did a comic called the Manhattan Projects, and he did another comic called East of West. This guy is absolutely brilliant, but it seems to be a true thread throughout of his stories. Like, he has a great beginning, and then the middle just goes on a little too long, and then he leaves, and then somebody else finishes his stories. And I don't know if you recall, but he got like pulled away from Marvel to Substack, and then he let other people finish his story. And I always wondered, like, what would have happened had he not left? Because now they hired him back, and they're finishing up Krakoa, but it was supposed to be like a 2-year story, and it's been going on for 6 years. Come on, Marvel, let the man finish his stories.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to write themselves out of this without going back to the status quo, because I don't know that I like the status quo either, right? The one thing about Marvel Universe which has never made sense and no one's ever been able to explain it is why mankind fears and hates mutants. But if you don't have your power from a mutant, from being mutated, then you're fine.
Right.
Like, Thing is fine. He went outer space and got cosmic rays, so he's fine. And Hulk is fine because it's gamma. But some big guy who's mutated, nah, that's bad, and that's made no sense. It
Right.
never has.
Don't
Why would I care where you get your power from when you kill my family?
Don't you think the scariest one would be Thor? This guy considers himself a Viking god, but he's not scary. He can control the weather.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, I mean, compare Thor to Storm, for example. The only real difference is Storm is a mutant, and yet people are like, "Oh, mutant! Oh, Thor! Yay!" I'm like, come on. I know that again that they were trying to make mutants an allegory, but it was just so dumb to me that's always been the case. You just be across the board. If someone has a power, you hate and fear them, and if they don't, whatever. That's just mind blowing to me, and they've never addressed that, and it's just stupidity.
Right? Yeah. I remember my big turning point on the X-Men was X-Men 200, where the X-Men finally capture Magneto, and then the world police captures Magneto. They put him on trial for his crimes, and then the X-Men come and they free Magneto. They capture him and they hide him out in the X-Men mansion because they're like, he's never going to get a break from humans, And then
he shouldn't get a break, for goodness sake.
Right. He just killed 10,000 people in the Soviet Union with this magnetic pole. And like the X-Men, he's finally on trial, and then they capture him and hide him away and say he's never going to get a fair break. But at the same time, we just want to be treated like everybody else. I'm like, you can't have it both ways, X-Men.
Well, they're really doing that with this new Krakoa storyline. They're like, right. Mutants are better than humans. You bow down to us, and that's fine. Another one of my favorite storylines was the what's the one where Scarlet Witch said no more mutants?
House of M.
House of M. I thought House of M was pretty well done because it was like, what if mutants ran the world? And I thought that was interesting. I like that. It reversed everything on its head, and that was an interesting storyline. It was actually a little too short. I think they could have run House of M a little bit longer.
Right, and House of M was a cool because it turned the tables. The X-Men became the oppressors, and the humans became the oppressed. It just shows you that it doesn't matter. There's still going to be problems. There is no such thing as a utopia. Wasn't Magneto acquitted? He was acquitted up until the point where he was de-aged, and then they said that forget those crimes, and then the past. But he was still on trial for the death of the 10,000 Russian soldiers and all the crazy stuff. Yeah, Magneto's and the warring the oppressed. Yes, like the old Dead Kennedy song. How many liberators really want to be dictators? Yeah. That the charismatic leader is seldom what he seems to be, is what I found through as a student of history. So you're not really a DC fan?
No, it's not that I'm not a DC fan. I don't mind DC. It's just that I decided to read Marvel. I don't have time to read everything, so I got into the X-Men. I always liked the X-Men. I always felt the Justice League were too powerful, the X-Men felt not as powerful. We're taking Professor X out of the equation, right? Or
Right.
even Jean Grey at Phoenix, but you take them out, and the X-Men are like, they have some powers, Iceman and all that. They're cool, but we have Superman who by himself doesn't need the rest of the Justice League.
Right.
So I struggle with that as a kid. I thought Superman was cool, but also it felt like the same storyline. Superman, no one can beat him. Kryptonite,
Yeah.
a new version of Kryptonite. Now, as I've gotten older, I enjoy those storylines more, but I liked Batman. As I get older, though, I'm starting to fade off Batman because I'll read these stories and I'm like, this is a great story. Like I just read a couple years ago, I read that it's a House of Owls, I think, or whatever.
Yeah.
These are great storylines, but I can't handle how dark they get. Sometimes I'm done reading it and I'm like, I just feel crummy. What the Joker does to people
Oh,
in
I
his
hate that.
storylines is just so over the top. And there only can be so many times where Batman can go, no, we can't kill him. Because I think even the most diehard anti putting someone to death person in the world would pull the trigger themselves on Joker at some point. Or even like a cop in that universe. Like if I was the commissioner, I'd be like, hey guys, listen, we don't kill people. We are the police. But
We
if
don't
you
kill
do
people, and then they give.
accidentally hit Joker, I won't be upset. You might even get a promotion.
Yeah. Yeah. What's going on in Gotham City that they can't even lock a door on Arkham Asylum? Nobody gets arrested. I mean, I
Yeah,
know
well,
that.
that happens in both universes, right? They
Yeah.
can't keep people in prison.
Yeah. I like this comment by Hojo. Oh, even Gandhi would execute the Joker.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, Court of Owls, not House of Owls. Yeah, you're right. No, I like that stuff, but Arkham, Batman, and Gotham, they don't seem to change much. I mean, they change a bit. They had, Robin grow up and become Nightwing, which was pretty cool. And
Right.
they've done some neat storylines. And one of my favorite storylines was when the earthquake came, and Gotham got separated into different sections.
Right.
And they're like, that was a really, I mean, and
No
they
man's
kept that storyline going for a bit. No Man's Land, I thought that was very enjoyable. I had a terrible ending. I mean, not terrible in it was written badly, but I was just like, oof, what an ending to that storyline.
Yes. Yes. That was a. There was a series of really good Batman stories that were long stories. There was No Man's Land. There was when geez, I can't remember the names of the stories now. They're escaping my mind. But when Bane breaks Batman's back, Nightfall. That
Oh
was.
yeah, Nightfall. That's a great. That's my favorite Batman story. I just wish that the return was better written. Azrael was an interesting character, but it still kind of fizzled out at the end.
Yeah. I had Chuck Dixon on my channel, one of the writers for Nightfall, and he says at that point, Nightfall, he said it was generating cash. It was just like, DC was taking everybody out for dinner. They were making so much money. And then when they put Azrael, Jean Paul Varley, I think was the character, as Batman, the sales plummeted. And it was supposed to be like a year long of psychopath. They were trying to show like what would happen if Batman actually does kill people, becomes the Punisher, and answer all these questions. But the sales were so bad that they shortened it by 6 months and put back. So it was kind of rushed. So there you
I
go.
think it would have been better if he hadn't changed that stupid outfit and if he had just called himself Batman. And then that would have caused some very interesting things. Gordon would have been like, "What is Batman doing?" But after a while, he's just like, "I'm not even Batman anymore." And I
Right.
felt that was kind of a weird thing. They just didn't want to have any long-term repercussions.
Well, that's
They
the
didn't want
problem.
people to say, "Oh, Batman killed somebody." No, that was actually Azrael.
Right. Well, that's the problem with long serialized comics. You can't. How are you going to change a character that's never meant to end? It's to me, it's one of the things I like about Batman is he's always Batman. It's like you go to get a hamburger. That's what a hamburger tastes like. This is what Batman is, and it's also the problem is sooner or later the status quo is gonna get returned. It's just the nature of the medium. Either. So let me ask you this: are you a fan of manga where you have a complete story and it's over? Characters change, characters die, never to return again, and the story is over.
No, I think that I actually okay. So I like that concept. I like a lot. I don't particularly like most manga styles. So, um, My kids love it, right? They love reading it. I also I I don't like reading books backwards. I know, or in the reverse order. My kids are like, "That's how you're supposed to do it." I'm like, "Sure, but in America, couldn't we just put them in the correct order? Or why does that? Why can't we just do it? You know, if our
Yeah, that
comics were
drives
put
me nuts too,
American
Tom.
comics were put backwards in Japan, I wouldn't be upset. But I do like one shot comics. I read a very very dark series one time called 100 Bullets. Have you ever read that?
Yeah, yeah, it's right on my spinner rack right over here. I'm rereading it because there's a lot of like mysteries and Easter eggs that in issue 2 there's something that refers to issue 50. So I got to reread it because a lot of it went over my head on the first read.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, but it's a very it has a beginning and an end. And that sort of
Right.
thing I find to be fascinating. If you never watch it, folks, 100 Bullets is a comic where it starts off where these people who have been wronged somehow, a guy will just show up and give them a gun and bullets and say these bullets are untraceable. You'll
Wow.
never be arrested for using them. What you do now is up to you. And that alone would be really interesting. But
And
then
here's proof of this person destroyed your life. If you want to kill him,
oh, that's right. Yeah, he'll be like, "Oh, you want to know why your life sucks? Here's some
yeah,
actual physical proof. This person did it. Now it's up to you." And that would be an interesting series. That's what when I start reading, that's what I thought the series was. But turns out there's this much deeper lore, much more going on with these things. These guys called the Minutemen, and they even go all the way back to Roanoke and
yeah,
bring that in board. And I don't want to spoil any parts of it because it's very
right.
interesting.
That's
But
why I
do
have to
realize
reread it. I'm like,
it's
wait a minute,
very adult.
this is different.
It's very adult and very, very dark. And many, many people in this series that you will like will not get a happy ending.
Right.
Although not there is some happy endings, but not all of them.
No, I'm trying to think. I know Ed Rizzo does the art. I think is it Ed Brubaker who I'm probably wrong. Oh no, Brian Azzarello, who is very dark. He did a lot of the dark Batman. I think he also wrote the Court of the Owls for Batman. So yeah, it would be, I think, R-rated is a fair way to describe it for those of you who don't know what we're talking about and you want to get it. It was called 100 Bullets because it's a 100-issue miniseries. If you want to call 100 issues a miniseries, but there's a beginning and there's an end. I do like that. Like the Watchmen, I thought was great. The characters evolved, changed, ended, story's over.
Yeah, The Watchmen is iconic now, because of everything. And then they made a movie of it, and they made a great miniseries on it on HBO Max. I really enjoyed that miniseries. But yeah, I'm a big fan of finished storylines, but then again, I don't mind it. Spider-Man's going forever either. But I do
Right.
wish there was more straight storylines, which is why I like the what ifs or the alternative comics like Red Superman, Red Sun. I love that, or Kingdom Come. I like those because they have a beginning and an ending.
And phenomenal art in Kingdom Come. That painted work by Alex Ross is some of the most beautiful American comic art ever. I absolutely love that. Kingdom Come, I love because I'm a big Superman fan. I Superman's my favorite superhero. I love the whole concept of this this all-powerful being that is just good and intrinsically good, and just the fact that he shows up, gets other people to sit up straight, fix their ties, or behave better. Like, to me, that's what Superman is supposed to be. And I love the idea that Superman left and then all the other superheroes became troublemakers and arrogant and kind of, and then Superman had to come back like daddy and give everybody a spanking. I thought that was just a great story.
Did you like Red and Blue Superman?
No, but I didn't go crazy like people did for Superior Spider-Man, because I know how comic books work. Red and Blue, they're gonna try something and then they're gonna come back together again, and like the death of Superman. We all knew he wasn't dead. Come on. They're not gonna kill Superman. They had the little kid Superboy and Steel and all this, and then Superman just gonna come back, and he had that horrible mullet, and then he cut his hair back and he became Superman again. That's the way it is.
Yeah, that mullet. But he got married in that mullet, so you got
Yeah.
so, now there's another comic series I like that why am I forgetting the name of it? It's where the fairy tale characters
Fables.
live in New York City. Fables.
Yeah,
So Fables
Fables.
also has right. It has it's I mean, they made offshoots and blah blah blah. That's such an interesting comic. It has some definitely, again, it has some more adult themes in it. There's definitely a lot of stuff. I mean, you're not expecting some of the stuff that they happens in that. Like, for example, what's their names as sniper? Is that Red Riding Hood as a sniper?
Uh,
I think it's
yeah, Cinderella was like the ultimate spy, killing people, and
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
there's some
forget,
really interesting things in it.
and made you love the big bad wolf, one of the greatest characters.
Right, right. It's such an interesting story, and they definitely have endings and I mean the ending to the very first storyline ends with executions,
Yes,
and it's like whoa. It's very much, but it's a fascinating story, and I really like the final ending of it, or at
right.
least
It was
going
very
through it.
satisfying. Like for those of you who haven't read Fables, it was written by Bill Willingham, and Bill Willingham is one of my favorite comic book artists and writers. He's a phenomenal artist, but he doesn't do too much art anymore. And it's the Fable characters live in New York, and then because they got kicked out of the fairylands by what they call the adversary, and for 50 issues you're wondering who the adversary is, and I'm not going to spoil it, but when they reveal who the adversary is, you're like, how did they do this? They made you hate like a beloved character, and he was bad and had logical consequences. It had a great beginning, a great middle, great end. And like Tom said, characters die that is shocking. You know, it is a really good comp. They just brought it back, believe it or not. They extended it for another 12 issues, and then Bill Willingham.
But see, I don't know. Maybe I'll read that, but like I said, I was happy with where it ended.
Right, me too. I was kind of disappointed when they brought it back. Sometimes you just leave well enough alone. You know, we don't need sequels to everything. It's good to let things go. Yeah, I named my dog Big B. One of my buddies had a big German Shepherd that he named Big B. I loved it. Such a good story. Did you ever read a comic called The Elementals?
Uh, I don't think so.
It came out in the 80s. It was Bill Willingham who did Fables, and it was his first comic, and it was like the Watchmen before the Watchmen. It was like logical consequences, like the superheroes killed the villains, and then next thing you know, the superheroes are becoming the bad guys and take over the world. It was very dark, but at the time, it was the first dark comic, and I was a big fan of it. But I also realized that it was like patient zero of all the things I don't like about comics, all the darkness and grittiness, and it led to things like Dark Knight Returns and the Watchmen. I think
I
it's one
don't
of the
think
most.
I've read anything of his besides Fables.
Yeah,
I'm
he,
looking
he,
at his list of stuff here.
he
Oh, I read his side quest Jack of Fables. I did read that, but
yeah,
that's
Ever
also
After.
Fables, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I apologize, John. I
I
have to
know,
run here.
I know. You're a busy man, and I'm so glad that you came. Thank you. Shows you how much I really wanted to talk to you. I was willing to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a vacation to talk. I appreciate you, Tom. I'm a big fan. I know you're not going to believe this, but I've watched every video on the Dice Tower. Once I discovered you, I'm kind of those compulsive people that needed to watch everything. It's one of my favorite things. Every day I come home from work, I sit in this chair and I turn on the Dice Tower and I watch your reviews. You've cost me thousands of dollars, I would just like to say, in buying board games. I'm one of those people, but I enjoyed every moment of it, playing board games with people. Uh, I was a comic book guy, and I don't know what it was, but something about Dice Tower came on across my YouTube feed, and it was I think you were talking about Arkham Horror, and I played that game, Arkham Horror Second Edition, and I've been a board game fan ever since. So thank you for that. And I tried. My wife and I went to 5 Dice Tower cons. Um, we've made friends at Dice Tower Con that we go out of the way to talk to every time we're there. We got a suite the last time, and all 6 of us stayed in the room. It was a blast. So I want to thank you for all that. It really is became an important part of my life, playing board games with friends. So thank you, and thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you very much, John. I appreciate this. I like talking about comics a lot. I could spend many, many hours doing this.
Yeah, me too. Well, that's what I do. I started YouTube because during COVID there was nobody to talk to, so let's talk comics with people. People weren't getting, and it led me to talk to you. It led me to talk to so many wonderful people. So thank you, Tom. Thank you for coming. I really enjoyed this. I don't want to keep you here. I could blather on for another 20 hours, but I'm a crazy person. But thanks a lot. Thanks everybody in the chat. Wow, I didn't expect so many people to be up this early with me, because normally I do my stuff late at night. Thank you, everybody. Thank you in the chat, and thank you, Tom. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Oh, I hit the wrong button.